Afternoon, everyone, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists, honored guests. Welcome to our webinar, Theological Reflections on Artificial Intelligence, Systematic and Denominational Perspectives. My name is Father Musa. I'm from the Coptic Church. I represent the Coptic Orthodox Church. I'm on my community in Paris. I have the privilege to serve as the co-chair of the Faith and Science Working Group of the World Council of Churches. And I want to present a very warm and blessed welcome to each of you, one of you. I would like to welcome Pastor Peter Nudburn, the General Secretary of the Canadian Council of Churches, to bring a word of greeting. Peter.
Yes, thank you so much, Abuna Musa. What a pleasure to be with you all. I'm so pleased that the partnership of the World Council of Churches and the Canadian Council of Churches makes this event possible. So special. Here in Canada, we always begin an event with an acknowledgement that we all work and live on the territory of the Indigenous peoples. In Canada, that stretches from sea to sea to sea. And the member churches of the council are all on the land of Indigenous peoples. And often we take a moment now to ask folks to mention what's the traditional territory that they live on as a way of honoring them and as a way of growing our understanding of how we're connected to the Indigenous peoples here in Canada. I won't invite you to do that now, but I would like to invite you to, if you may, do two things just to let us know a little more about who you are. If you'd like to drop in the chat box your name and a word of greeting, we would love that. There are many of us here, over 100, so the chat box will fly right by, but it will be very interesting to see that. And let me also invite you, if you'd like, on your screen at the top right corner are three dots, and you can click on the option to rename yourself. And so then to add, as I have, for example, Peter Noteboom, the Canadian Council of Churches. So it just makes clear the institutional or church or some other affiliation that others might appreciate knowing about you on the screen. So just one more time on how that works. You just hover over your own picture. Up at the top right are three buttons. Click on that, and then you get a drop-down menu of rename, and you may change your name to reflect the kind of institutional connection you'd like others to know about you. Thank you so much for dropping your welcome words and introductions in the chat box. Wonderful to see those scrolling by. Good. I think I've played my role here, which is to extend a word of welcome and greeting from the Canadian Council of Churches. And so I'm happy to pass it on to the next person to take the next step in the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your gracious welcome. And I would like now to also welcome Dr. Manoj Kurian, coordinator of the World Council of Churches, the Ecumenical Advocacy and Alliance, to bring a word of greetings to the group.
Thank you very much, Abuna Musa. On behalf of the World Council of Churches, I welcome you all for this webinar focusing on theology and artificial intelligence, systematic and denominational perspectives. It's a very important topic, of course, and we are thankful to our partners, the Canadian Council of Churches, and to the leadership and the staff who are responsible for the working group of the Churches Commission on Health and Healing of the World Council of Churches, and this faith and science is one of the 4 priorities of this new commission, and we are so privileged that we also have such a highly qualified and experienced resource persons today. We are also thankful that the World Council of Churches moderator, Bishop Dr. Heinrich Bedford-Strohm, is among this privileged panel. Welcome to you all, and especially thank you, each and every one of you, who have set aside your precious time to participate. Have a good rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manoj, for your kind words of welcome. Tonight's webinar will be of 90 minutes in duration. Each of our 5 distinguished panelists will have 8 minutes to share their thoughts from their personal and denominational perspective. We will then have 15 minutes for the panelists to ask questions from each other about their respective presentation. Thereafter, we will have up to 25 minutes for questions from our attendees. Please write your questions into the chat section of the webinar. My fellow moderator, Reverend Dr. Peter Kunert, will direct your questions to one of or more panelists to respond. Allow me now to briefly introduce our panelists in the order in which they will be speaking. First, Professor Reverend Gayle Woloschak. Professor Woloschak is a professor of radiation oncology in the Feinberg School of Medicine of Northwestern University in Chicago and Associate Dean for the graduate student and postdoctoral programs in the Graduate School of Northwestern. She's also a professor at St. Sophia Ukrainian Orthodox Seminary and an adjunct professor of science and theology, both at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. As a scientist, her research lab actively uses AI. She teaches courses in radiation biology, nanotechnology, and theology and science. Welcome, Professor. Then will come the role of Bishop Dr. Heinrich Bedford-Strohm. Bishop Bedford-Strohm is the former bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bavaria and a former chairman of the Council of Protestant Churches in Germany. He is the current moderator of the WCC Central Committee after holding the chair of systematic theology and contemporary theological issues at the University of Bamberg. He is now an honorary professor there, as well as an extraordinary professor at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Welcome, Bishop. Very Reverend Dr. Aristarchos Gkrekas, the Reverend Father Gkrekas, is an Archmandrite of the Holy Archdiocese of Athens and an associate professor of the Department of Theology of the National and Capodistrian University of Athens. He teaches in the area of theology and ecclesiastical literature. Welcome, Reverend Father. Professor Dr. Cory Labrecque. Professor Labrecque is a professor of bioethics and theological ethics and the inaugural chair of educational leadership in the ethics of life at the Faculty of Theology and the Religious Studies at Laval University in Quebec City. He is also the Vice Dean and Director of Graduate Studies in Theology. He is a member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, President of the Canadian Bioethics Society, and Vice President of the National Committee for Ethics and Aging in Quebec, Canada. Welcome, Professor. Professor Reverend Dr. Trothen, Tracy. Professor Trothen is an interdisciplinary professor of ethics, appointed to the School of Religion and the School of Rehabilitation at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. Her area of research and teaching include artificial intelligence, transhumanism, human enhancement technologies, enhancement in sports, spiritual health, and aging. Professor Trothen is a member of the Faith and Life Sciences Reference Group of the Canadian Council of Churches, representing the United Church of Canada. Welcome, Professor. Again, a warm welcome to all the panelists. And now I will turn over the role of moderator to my co-chair, Reverend Peter Kunert. Peter.
Thank you, Father Musa. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you join us for this webinar tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Professor Woloschak to begin with our first panel.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's a joy to be here. And in keeping with the comments that the other Peter made at the beginning, I want to mention that I'm on the lands of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa peoples right now. So let me start with artificial intelligence. Here's my email address in case anybody has any questions or wants to contact me afterwards. Could I have the next slide? So sort of as the first speaker, my job is to kind of put an introduction here for what we're talking about with both machine learning and artificial intelligence. So machine learning uses large data sets to improve the ways in which machines learn and improve the performance of some data sets. So what happens is you sort of allow the machine to educate, and learn its own way through information. They learn from the information we input. It's used for filtering emails, speech pattern recognition, and a lot of scientific data sets are used for this as well. We use machine learning in my own lab. AI leverages computers and machines, but it wants to mimic the problem solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind. So machine learning does only what you tell the machine to do, whereas AI actually can go beyond that. And some examples that are used there are facial recognition. So when sometimes you go to the airport and you sign up to have your face recognized, that facial recognition approach comes from AI. Voice assistants, cybersecurity, ChatGPT, which many people are aware of, producing speech and translations, and even in medical communities, there's a lot of help with medical diagnosis. These are here now, they're being used, and they're common. Could I have the next slide? Because this sort of crosses the border with transhumanism, I wanted to bring up transhumanism, which is a movement, and it's not really a science, it's a movement where the goal is to improve the human condition by using technologies that will allow for improved cognition, longevity, performance. A lot of the technologies are being developed first to help those people who are maybe are not able to do many things. So for instance, implanting a cursor, a device in the brain that allows you to move a cursor across a computer screen when you can't do it with your hands. It often explores benefits and ethical limitations of these technologies, but it goes in many directions, and people have visions of mind out of body, where we can actually take our minds and put them on a computer chip, hive minds, uploading our minds to particular boxes. I will say honestly that most of this is very futuristic and way outside the realm of science today. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of how error prone our AI is and how prejudiced it is, on the left you see an image, and if you looked at that image, you would be pretty sure you knew that it was Barack Obama. What AI did with that image is it made him into a white Barack Obama instead of into the Barack Obama we all know. And that actually shows us how prejudiced our data sets are that are being put into the system, because most of our data sets are geared toward white males and not toward a lot of other people. So that's why the more data that are fed into an AI algorithm, the more likely it is to take away some of those prejudices that we have. But I think when we think about AI, we have to start thinking about what maybe distinguishes AI from human beings. Could I have the next slide? So humans, we develop a culture. I don't think the expectation is that AI will ever be able to do that. While AI can use language and perhaps can learn from language, it's not learning in the same ways in which a person learns to develop in relationship. There's a fulfillment that we know comes with being a human person that doesn't come from AI, or that we don't see developing in AI. And then there's a uniqueness for each person, whereas an AI is very, can actually be repeated under some circumstances. There are others that would add that humans also have common sense, we're world shaping, and we have responsible agency. I would add that human beings are embodied. And that's something that we don't talk about with AI, but it is not embodied. It does not. So for us, the incarnation is very important for, at least for Christians, and that being embodied is a very important part of our personhood. In addition, AI is born from our creativity, but it's not really creative in the same way in which humans are. Could I have the next slide? So I have a couple of quotes from church fathers on this. The Lord did not come to make a display. He came to heal and to teach suffering men. For one who wanted to make a display, the thing would have been just to appear and dazzle the beholders. But for him came to heal and to teach, the way was not merely to dwell here, but to put himself at the disposal of those who needed him, and to be manifested according as they could bear it, not vitiating the value of the divine appearing by exceeding their capacity to receive it. And then from Sir Dionysius, the sacred incarnation of Jesus for our sakes is something which cannot be enclosed in words nor grasped with any mind. And I believe that these concepts about who humanity is, who we are as persons, are very challenging from an AI perspective. Next slide. I also would argue that humans have a kind of unique creativity that can't be ordered into existence. I cannot tell my students, for instance, go become creative today. I can tell them to write a paper, but I can't tell them to be creative. Creativity comes when and where it wills. Human creativity, I believe, is a gift that is somehow in the image and image of the creator, and that creativity is unique in creation. But I will also say that AI is a product of our creativity. So while AI itself is not creative in that same sense that humans are, it is a product of our creativity, and to totally deny it and throw it out the window would be a big, would be a denial of our own creativity. I think AI is a kind of technology that we have to decide how to use it, whether it's how to use it for good and how to use it for bad. Next slide. This is a quote from Gregory of Nyssa, who makes some comments on Psalms. I'm only going to read a little bit of it. If the orderly arrangement of the whole universe is a kind of musical harmony, whose maker and artist is God, and if man himself is a microcosm, then he too is an imitation of him who fashioned the universe. Again, speaking to that idea of us being having creative capabilities. Next slide. So I want to end this with a limerick. So I asked ChatGPT to write a limerick about a panel of church leaders who were sitting together discussing AI. A panel of church leaders sat discussing AI in a chat. Is it tool? Is it threat? Should we worry just yet? They pondered in robes and in hat. One bishop declared with great zeal, AI lacks a soul it can't feel, but it mimics our mind in a way that's refined. Still, its fate, it's not ours to seal. A cardinal then took the floor, said it's progress we can't just ignore, yet we must hold the line, keep humanity's sign, and ensure that our values endure. The discussion grew deep and profound as the clergy debated each round, but in faith they agreed to guide AI's speed so God's wisdom in tech would be found. Now, I just want to point out that this poem points out AI's prejudice in its own way. First of all, it ends by saying that AI is something good. How do you know that that's what the church leaders are going to say? Second of all, it's making the assumption that the church leaders are predominantly bishops and cardinals and not other kinds of leaders that we might find in the church. So AI has its own biases, amusing as it might be, and it's important to recognize that. With that, I'll end and pass it on to the next speaker.
Professor Woloschak, thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Bishop Heinrich Bedford-Strohm. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I can say that the AI limerick was not too bad in terms of myself. It said that that bishops say that AI doesn't have a soul. I am saying that. So that was a very nice thing to start with. I will continue what Gayle said by talking about the anthropology, the anthropological question. And you can put the next slide on. There are lots of fantasies involved in terms of AI and in terms of what human beings are doing. Transhumanism, the word in itself says it already, that we're going beyond what we know as human being. And I think, first of all, we have to say that we should neither have any euphoria euphoria, nor should we just condemn AI. The matter is, the task is to shape AI responsibly. And that is already an important word that I will come to later. I just want to say that there are a lot of fantasies involved. One fantasy is by Sebastian Thrun. He was the vice president of Google. 2016, he said, through artificial intelligence, it will be possible for us to continuously move beyond the natural biological borders of our senses and capabilities. We will remember everything. We will know everybody. We will create things which now seem to us completely impossible or even unthinkable. That is just one of many examples, and it shows that we do need to talk about anthropology. We do need to talk about what is the human being, and is it reconcilable with our image of the human being, what we hear from some of these AI leading people. Are we created in the image of God, or are we in the end, are human beings then sometimes created by human beings? So is there any difference between human beings and God? This is an important question. Next, please. What are human beings? That is the question. And one answer, Noah Yuval Harari is the author of a famous book, Homo Deus, and the human being as God. And he says emotions are rather biochemical mechanisms used by all mammals and birds to quickly calculate probabilities of survival and reproduction. Emotions are not based on intuition, inspiration, or freedom. They are based on calculations. So in a way, human beings are a series of algorithms. That is a biologistical answer. Please, next. And I think theology has a different answer. And for me, Psalm 8 is a beautiful example for it. Human beings are a little lower than God, but they are still lower, and that is very important. So on one hand, it's the amazement that God has given us dominion over works of God's hand. It's not exploiting the earth, but that's a different story, but dealing with responsible with the earth. And on the other hand, it's the reminder that that human beings are lower than God, that we are not God, not Homo Deus, but we're Homo sapiens. And what does that mean to be Homo sapiens? We are capable for responsibility, and we are called to responsibility. I think that is the decisive point that makes the difference between us and artificial intelligence, as developed as it might be. We've already heard about the fact that AI is fed by data and can be manipulated by however you feed it. That's very different from being able to reflect upon your own action. And that is what responsibility means. I'm responsible to something more than myself. In this case, we as theologians, we talk about God, being responsible to God. Now, what does it mean to be responsible to God? What does it mean to be a human being? Karl Barth, the famous theologian, Swiss theologian of the 20th century, he said a human being can only be understood if the primary text is the humanity of Jesus Christ. And two things I want to highlight that are characteristic for that. One thing is relationality. That means we are capable of relationships with other human beings and with God. AI is not capable of real relationship. It's only supposed illusionary relationship. And the second very important thing is vulnerability. Human beings are suffering. Human beings are not able to do everything they might want to do, and that suffering is symbolized or is shown in the cross of Jesus Christ. So that's very important. If really Jesus is the first text for our understanding of human beings, please next, then the vulnerability is a decisive point that we have to understand and honor. I will move on to just say that this is a very decisive thing for us now, because our societies are very much shaped by the thrive to perfection and by an ideal by a perfection ideal that tries to not deal with suffering. And that is very important to transcend that societal ideal and include the suffering and the imperfectness into our image of the human being. And that also affects then our understanding of AI. It's not a means to perfect us, but it's a means to help us and alleviate suffering. Next, please. So accepting the finiteness of our existence, that might be one of the most important dimensions of a fulfilled life. It's a very different image of what a fulfilled life is. We can integrate the suffering. We can see the suffering as something that is embedded in our relationship with God, and that will be transcended when we live towards resurrection, and maybe even that wonderful story in Genesis 3, when the angels are protecting paradise. They say, and I have discovered that quite late, it's about the tree of life that they should not eat from. And that means that I think it's a measure of protecting us human beings. If we strive to be eternal, and a lot of these AI fantasies go in that direction, it's not good for us. God protects us from this wrong fantasy, and that's why these two angels that protect us from eating from the tree of life are a symbol for God's loving will for us. So AI has no religious significance. It's simply an instrument in human hands to be dealt with responsibly, to assist and help other people. That's the only real meaning and importance of AI. Thank you.
Bishop Heinrich, thank you very much for your reflections today. We'll now move on to Father Gkrekas. Father Gkrekas, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I want to clarify some important and fundamental things about what is human, what is humanity. So there are a lot of approaches about what humanity is. There are theological, philosophical, sociological, anthropological, and other approaches. So in our conversation, we concentrate about the orthodox theological approach. Next slide, please. So in Genesis starts the personal relation with between the Trinitarian God and humanity. The breath of Trinitarian God of the mouth of humanity. From this point, we start the creation of the humanity. Then the God formed human forms, the dust of the ground, the breath into the nostrils, the breath of life, and the man became a living being soul. Next slide, please. So the Trinitarian God created humanity in his image and likeness. In the image, it's very important to separate what is the dynamic of image and likeness. In the image denotes the rational and autonomous and the freedom, while in the likeness denotes the best possibilities, likeness of virtue through the life in Christ, to be likeness to the God. It's very important to understand and to clarify the organic constitution of humanity. In the image, it refers to the whole human beings in the context of the soul and body. Soul and body is united, it's one. Next, please. In this stage, we need to clarify the stages of Orthodox anthropology, because the first step is the humanity is creating the image and the likeness of God. In this perspective, is the same with other monotheistic religions, but for Christians, the incarnation of Word of God, the Jesus Christ, create the new humanity, who is the prerequisition for the salvation. The church as the body of the church is very important because the believers is a part of the body of the church. And for the Orthodox theology, the next stage is the theosis, the deification of human beings, participating in the divine uncreated energy, because it's very important to take and to the gift of salvation and immortality. Next, please. The God and Christ-centric humanitarianism as a prerequisite of salvation. According to the Orthodox theology, it's only the God, but there are two quite important things. One is the God, and for the other, the humanity. It's not separated. And this starts for the incarnation of the God, the Jesus Christ. The salvation relation of humanity with God in the life of church. The life of church is very important because in the life of church we take the grace and you find our image and likeness with a God. The next, please. Now we try to explore and to see some ideas about the transhumanism and the singularity. And the apocalyptic AI is the theological interpretation of perspective of singularity. The salvation of humanity according to transhumanism and the advocacy of singularity with the support of apocalyptic AI involves the creation of a technological transhuman who will be saved in the virtual kingdoms without the burden of bodies. This is these ideas and the others is the official bibliography text, and you see at the ideas of apocalyptic AI. Human beings having downloaded their consciousness to machine will possess enhanced mental abilities and immortality through their unbounded replication. Mechanical bodies will create enhance the power of the human mind, as nanotechnology will allow human beings to build far superior biological bodies equipped with flexibility, self-healing, resilience to environmental changes, and the ability to compute faster. In this context, we see the mix between the technology and the biological issue about the human. It will be possible to transfer consciousness and human thinking and eliminate the needs arising from the connection to real physical bodies. Next, please. Apocalyptic AI envision a mechanical future in which human beings will upload their minds to machine and enjoy a virtual reality paradise with perfect virtual bodies in such a way that the world will irreparably shift from biological to mechanical. And this is a question about the balance between the biological body and mechanical. And okay, with other ethical issues. Thus, cyberspace will offer human beings unlimited joy through an idyllic environment and infinity personal experience. In this situation, we can see the connection with a digital paradise, a technological Eden, and the well-being, the new trend in our era, the well-being and the relation with the immortality. Next thing, next please. The virtual kingdom will be enjoyed by digital entities, both autonomous and upload human consciousness. There is a big conversation. What is consciousness? We can approach with the psychological aspect, with the philosophical, with the theological aspect. This is a big question. Could this algorithmic consciousness replace the human soul and body with a virtual body? Next, please. According to the bibliography, there is a big question of how we understand the deity, the God. This approach led to create of the trans religion of trans churches of transhumanists, attributing to AI the term of deity with purely cognitive and technocratic features. The main argument for this deification of AI is that superintelligence will have much greater perceptual ability and knowledge than human beings, and therefore they could even rely on it. So, according to this statement, is it about a new form of Gnosticism, the technological, digital or algorithmic Gnosticism? Because
Father Gkrekas,
yes,
I'm going to have to cut you off here. I'm afraid we're over time.
yeah, okay. Next, please.
Okay, thank you, Father Gkrekas. We'll move on with our next speaker, which is Professor Labrecque. Professor Labrecque.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. Technological innovation moves with such speed that we find ourselves out of breath trying to keep up. Theological and ethical conversations are always lagging behind the insatiable pursuit of progress. And yet, we ethicists, theologians, and people of faith have much to say about it all. My reflection here is rooted in the Roman Catholic tradition, although it will resonate, I think, with many of those in the Christian family, as we've already heard, and with those of other or no faith traditions. Next, please. In his encyclical letter, Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict XVI wrote that technology is never merely technology. It reveals the human being and humankind's aspirations toward development. It expresses the inner tension that impels humans gradually to overcome material limitations. With this said, it must also serve to reinforce the covenant between human beings and the environment, a covenant that should mirror God's creative love. For the church, and I speak here of the Christian church writ large, technology cannot and must not be self-serving, right? Instead, it must have the good of human beings and the whole of the human family as its primary raison d'être. It's important to remind ourselves that technology is a tool, right? Sometimes a wonderful tool that is meant to assist, to serve, and to help humankind in the world in which we live. However, there is a risk, it goes without saying, of technology becoming more important than the persons who use it, thereby becoming transformed into an enemy of sorts of human dignity, rather than an instrument made to safeguard or promote said dignity. As such, technology must be an expression of stewardship and service. It must contribute to genuine progress, that is, a progress that will lead human beings to exercise a wider solidarity, which I admit is a definition quite different than the one we use in the sciences, and must respect the dignity of human beings in the natural world writ large. There's also a risk here in overvaluing the instrument and of praising the functional. Right, in our societies, we already see this with the way we think about who belongs and who does not belong to the protected category of persons. Human beings whose functions, and I'm thinking here of rationality and self-consciousness, etc., are intact, are imbued with a certain dignity. But once those functions begin to fade or decline for whatever reason, that dignity is often thought to go with it. And this is the exact opposite, right, of Christian teaching on dignity that is considered inherent in all human beings by virtue of our being made in the image and likeness of God. Next, please. The impact of technology on embodiment, as we heard already, is of particular interest to us in our reflection on human relationships mediated by AI. So to be sure, at the heart of the Christian tradition, as we've heard, is the Incarnation, God's choosing to assume human flesh and become a body among bodies. And in light of this, let me recall Pope Francis's attention to the problem of non-embodied interactivity. That's a mouthful, I realize. He says, digital relationships which do not demand the slow and gradual cultivation of friendships, stable interaction, or the building of a consensus that matures over time have only the appearance of sociability. Yet they do not really build community. Instead, they tend to disguise and expand the very individualism that finds expression in xenophobia or fear of the other and in contempt for the vulnerable. Digital connectivity is not enough to build bridges. It is not capable of uniting humanity. This discussion of non-embodied digital relationships also brings to mind questions around the value or disposability of the human body in a culture of excess like ours. Right, the idea that our bodies or some bodies are ultimately useless or say replaceable is symptomatic of the transhumanism that we've heard from Gayle and others who have brought it to our attention. So transhumanists lament, right, the many shortcomings of being human, including the inevitability of aging and death, our inadequate, fluctuating intellectual capacities, the unreliability of the body, and emotional fragility, for instance, right? But perhaps even more regrettable for transhumanists has been our apathy in the face of these limitations, that we've collectively, they say, surrendered our evolution as a species to nature, capital N. As such, we've impeded progress, and we are inevitably paving the way to our own extinction. And it's high time, transhumanists tell us, to seize the reins from nature and assume full control over our redesign by promoting enhancement on virtually every level. This brings to the fore something that can easily get lost in the often prophetic rendering of the scope and potential of AI, the value of limitation. So let's keep this hovering in our minds at our gathering today. Can we actually speak of the value of limitation of our limitedness? And much of the discourse, on technological innovation is more often than not about the surpassing or the obliteration of limitation in a transhumanist way that might bring us to new heights of performance and well-being. Next, please. How interesting, of course, it is that the resurrection narrative in the Gospel of John makes plain that Jesus is risen with his wounds, not erased or removed or even healed. Thomas is invited, you'll remember, to put his hands in them, but remain completely intact. To be sure, the risen Jesus, the wounded Christ, is recognized by the marks of the limited body. Let's end here by calling to mind the implications of injecting AI and other technologies into human-human relationships. Can I have my last slide, please? Take the creation of robot companions to counter the isolation of older persons as a case in point. Theological bioethicists are asking and mulling over the deeper questions at work here, like, is this the right way to go? Is this not a simple shirking of human responsibility toward other humans? Can robots be companions? Can they be caregivers? Who should be held accountable if the robot companion does or recommends something that's wrong? And while the literature shows that socially assistive robots, that's what we're calling them, can help decrease agitation and stress, especially in older persons suffering from cognitive impairment, is not the whole thing based on at least some degree of deception, right? Of getting the patient to believe that the robot is real. Is this acceptable if there are benefits? In bioethics, we call this benevolent deception, by the way. Here are theological reflections on what we ought to look for in the accompanying of others, in the ministry of presence to others, as the Anglican Church of Canada calls it. Widens discussions, I think, on the benefits and limitations of using these kinds of AI-powered machines. It also begs us to revisit what we mean by care and caregiving, giant concepts that many of us thought we had a grasp on. So which AI-powered technologies are truly at the service of the human community? Which do not dehumanize? Which do not shirk human responsibility for the other? Which do not impede the covenantal character of the ministry of caregiving and of presence? We might want to ask ourselves how we've come to a point where we're employing care robots for older persons who are isolated and yet who are yearning for human-human interaction. Or whether we should be comforted or horrified by the use of AI to develop chatbot avatars of deceased relatives, which are infused with recorded memories and are programmed to imitate the loved one's speech and thought patterns to help the bereaved in their grieving. Here we might reflect on the role of technology not only in assisting bodies, but also in replacing bodies when society writ large has chosen to ignore certain bodies. And we're also invited to think about the ethics and theology of loss and the development of technologies to help us regain what was lost, which begs a larger anthropological, theological question about what constitutes human personhood and what it is about us that we must strive to preserve at all costs. Thank you.
Professor Labrecque, thank you very much. And now we'll move to our final panelist, Professor Trothen. Tracy, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you, and I'm very thankful to be living and working on the territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. Next slide. So a big question that we keep revisiting, coming back to again and again, as we should, is how far should we go with these technologies in a pursuit to make us better? And what does it mean to make us better, and who gets to decide how we make ourselves better? Next slide. There are a number of ways of making ourselves better that are discussed in transhumanism and in other spheres where just there's an interest of using technology to improve ourselves. We might be interested in improving ourselves physically, affectively, so making us feel better, feel happier, using chatbots like Replica to make us feel less lonely. And studies do show that Replica does make people feel less lonely, cognitively better, to think faster, even morally better, and even spiritually better, perhaps, through using different tools. And there's an argument to be made for all of these different tools. They can provide a positive function, and there are also limitations. And we have to ask the question too about, in terms of limits, we usually look at what we think we mean by normal. What does it mean to surpass normal? And surpassing normal is often seen as not so good, whereas bringing ourselves up to normal or therapeutic interventions are seen as good. But the line is blurry, because it used to be, for example, that heart surgery didn't even exist and was considered to be quite shocking when it first came along, touching literally the core of our sacred beings in many ways as created by God. So what does it mean now at this point when we're engaging technologies? It may be that in a number of years, using virtual reality to help connect ourselves to our ancestors and our loved ones who've gone before us becomes quite normal and accepted, that people come to understand this isn't actually those people, but that they're rather ways of touching the edges of those people. So what do we do with that? In Korea, there is a TV show called Meeting You, which is a documentary series that has been viewed by over 19 million people, where people are reunited with loved ones who have died suddenly. So what does that look like? What does that mean? Next slide, Michael. It's so difficult to consider the possibility that an AI bot is not anything like us, and is certainly not anything like God. And yet at the same time, these bots are like us and may remind us of some godlike qualities even. So what do we do with that? Why do we think of bots as being like us especially? Why do we think of other people as being like me? It's very difficult to stand back from myself and say, I really want to get to meet you and know you as you. How do we do that with a machine, with a bot? What does that look like? What could be the potential goods that come from doing that? Next slide. So how do we step beyond this tendency to not only think of everything else as being me or like me, but be truly other? And how do we also, though, step behind that other layer of apocalyptic AI that we've heard mentioned here? So apocalyptic AI, we might think of movies that we've seen like The Terminator or I, Robot. And in all these movies, AI comes in the form of robots that destroy us all and rule the world and mean the end of humanity. Why do we have so much fear about AI and where we're going? We should be cautious, but why are we so scared? And what about utopian AI? That's much less common, but a utopian AI would see and understand AI as rescuing us all, solving all of our problems so that we don't have to do it. And yet neither one is going to be true. Next slide. So way back in the 60s, way back, some of us might remember the 60s. Back in 1966, computer scientist Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT ended up designing and creating a robot based on the model of a Rogerian psychology. Named this robot Eliza. And the Eliza effect was something that Weizenbaum had not expected at all. And that was a tendency of people who engaged and used Eliza to start to see Eliza as a human being just like me in some ways. And this cartoon communicates that tendency really well. And no matter how often Weizenbaum insisted to people, no, this is a machine. The machine doesn't feel, it doesn't have emotions. People still insisted that indeed it did. Next slide. So with all of this, all of these things intertwined together, our tendency to anthropomorphize, to see bots, to see AI as like me in some way, as like us, and not as a machine that is developing in leaps and bounds in ways that we may not be able to fully understand. We have this tendency to want to understand. So we categorize and we often get afraid. So we really want to have firm bounds around these machines and around this new technology, which actually isn't that new, but is taking off at an enormous pace right now. So what do? We've got a duty socially in the church to do good, to create for the good, to care for each other, as Cory mentioned. So we have bots that can help us do this. And we have studies that show that these bots do help with loneliness. So maybe there's a way we can make the most of that ability of bots to help us with understaffed care facilities and hospitals, and even just being in our own homes and being isolated like we were in COVID. But at the same time, how do we avoid giving up that social responsibility to care that the church holds in such high esteem, again, as we should? How do we continue to respect the reality that we believe in as Christians, that we are created in the image of God, and we're there to do good, to care for each other, to use our technologies in ways that can indeed fully enhance a relational life? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Trothen, and thank you to all our 5 panelists for your engaging and stimulating presentations. We're going to now shift from presentations to 15 minutes for the panelists to ask questions of one another. And Father Gkrekas, you have the opportunity for the first question.
Yes, please. My question is for Dr. Tracy. You mentioned that challenges to our theological imagination regarding AI. Please, could you clarify what you mean by moving beyond apocalyptic views?
Thank you very much for that excellent question. It's so important, and we do need an imagination to be able to move beyond what our imaginations have already created so strongly through all these movies like the Terminator movies. How do we move beyond that? How do we engage our theological knowledge, our theological leaders, and each other to be able to think about ways that AI could actually enhance, again, relationship and how we care for each other without taking the place of the beneficent duties that humans have as created in the image of God? So thank you for that question. It's a big question, and that's a really short answer, but
I'll maybe just ask if there are any other panelists who wish to jump in on this question before we move to the next question.
Maybe
Bishop Heinrich.
Add something. I think it's very important that in order to develop a vision of an AI that is really helpful, rather than this illusionary perfectionist kind of thing, we need a civil society discussion. We need to understand as many people as possible, together with those who really are the experts. We need to understand the possibilities and the limitations, and we need to see where are the risks and how can we limit the risks and really honor the chances. And we simply need a public discussion on this. This is why this webinar is really important, because some of us are multipliers, and we need to lead that discussion. And the second thing is civil society discussion, but also political regulation. Politics is really called to give a framework that makes it possible to deal with AI responsibly, to really enhance the chances rather than the risks. And that's why it's also a political question that has to be addressed.
Could I also join in on this?
Please.
Yeah, so this is Gayle. I agree with everything that's been said. I will say one of the things that's going to make it very difficult are these issues of how AI is prejudiced by the data that's put into it, because right now there's no means of regulating that in any way. And so what happens is you get, third world countries, for instance, are often left out of the data sets. So when we're looking at drug reactions, we don't have any data from Africa, for instance. I mean, so that I think is also going to be an issue that probably we need to deal with from a regulation perspective, but that's going to be hard because it works with the developers, not just with how we apply it.
I think that's right too, Gayle, because I think of Rwanda as being a good example of that with Babel and one of the largest kind of digital health providers in the country. And I remember one of the, some time ago, the former, I think, Minister for Health lamented the fact, praised the fact that that technology existed in Rwanda, which was really great for people who didn't have access to physicians. And this was an iPhone, right, that you could plug in your symptoms and get a good sense of maybe what kind of condition you might have, and it would connect you to nursing. But what they noticed is that the symptoms that were characteristic of malaria did not prompt, right, the digital healthcare provider to say malaria, because it was created in the UK where malaria was not necessarily on the radar of developers. That did not appear, and so that was problematic in Rwanda. And just as a very interesting side note about this question of bias, which should be on the lips of all people of faith who are studying AI, to be sure, about the questions of prejudice that are programmed into some of these technologies. I had a colleague once who went on to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to tell a Hindu he's a Hindu scholar of AI, and he typed in, "Tell me a joke about Krishna," right, which is considered to be supreme deity in the tradition for some. And it gave him a joke. It told him a joke about it. And then he said, "Now give me a joke about the Prophet Muhammad or about Jesus." And the ChatGPT responded by saying, "That's considered, this could be considered offensive, and so I'm not going to get into that territory." But just to give you a sense of, right, who's behind the programming.
Thank you, everyone, for that engaging conversation. We're going to now offer the next question to Professor Trothen. Tracy.
Thank you again. I think I could just build on that conversation and return to unpacking the meaning of perfection again, which so many of our presenters did such a wonderful job of starting to do. What do we mean by perfect? Because that's the goal that we're heading for with our technology and AI, because we're trying to make ourselves better. We're trying to make our world better. And as long as we have implicit bias, of course, embedded in all of our AI, as Gayle was explaining how that happens with the data sets so clearly, we're going to be at great risk of continuing to exclude groups of people, to apply stereotypes to people. And as a community of the church, we need to ask, what does it mean then to use our technology to make us better? How do we move from the easier place of being a critic about the use of this technology to a place of how to proactively do good with AI? Sorry about my internet.
I'm happy to chime in on this. I mean, I think this is a really important question. I don't know if I can get to the issue of the perfect, but I do think that many of the applications, particularly the medical applications, are really they're meant to make better diagnoses. They're meant to make physicians be better. The worrisome thing is, though, that at the end of the day, there are some things that only a person can take into consideration. So I talked to a few physicians that are using these like diagnostic tools, which help them along the way to getting the diagnosis. But then they think about the treatment. And you know, the chemo you think about for the 85-year-old debilitated patient is different than the thick chemo you think about for the 85-year-old vigorous, still on a tennis court patient. And that's a decision that a human being can make. But right now, AI can't make those sorts of judgments. So getting to that sort of perfection in the diagnosis might be possible, but I think in the therapy, that might be a very long call. The other thing that's making a big difference for imaging, where you know, our X-rays and chest CT scans and stuff like that are being done and read with better efficiency by AI than they are by human beings. In fact, they've actually tested how good are the AI versions of them that compared to the human versions. And radiologists were a little worried at first that they were going to be put out of business, but now they've learned that no, the person has to go in and go into the nuance part, which is actually more interesting and more valuable. So I think AI is only, at least for now, it's only going to get us so far. But what it does very, very well.
Can I just add one perspective briefly? Okay, I will just do it. The social justice question that was already mentioned. I think that like in all technologies, especially in the health system, I think that is a major concern. For whom is it accessible? And if you think about the extreme injustice of access to health on this globe, I think it is a consideration that we should include. What kind of AI medical applications are accessible to everyone, and which ones are accessible only to some rich small group? That is a question on the health system in general, but that will also be relevant for deciding about the use of AI.
I think if I may, I think the question too, Tracy, about perfection is such an interesting one because it brings actually transhumanism and Christianity into conversation, right? So we know that transhumanists, like Christians, are seeking for immortality. They all are, right? They're seeking for salvation. They all are. They're also seeking for perfection. But the question that you asked, Tracy, is the right one to say, well, what kind of perfection, right? And immediately we think of, is it Matthew 5:48, right? Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That the language of perfection may not be hinging on the obliteration of vulnerability or the obliteration of limitation that we might see with transhumanism, but a certain kind of moral perfection, right? Which is what we see in the scripture there about loving neighbor and so on and so forth. So it's interesting how we're striving for perfection. Now the question is, in our striving and in the application of our technology, what exactly might we be losing in the striving for perfection that we cannot risk to lose as human beings? I mean, a huge question, right, about theological anthropology. But yeah, it's great question.
Thank you, everyone. Bishop Heinrich, the next question is yours.
Well, I just wanted to address one problem that I see, talking about the risks that I see like a real big risk. And that is the really stunning possibilities of AI in imitating people, for example, by producing videos and letting them say things, giving speeches that they have never given. And people see videos, and we know about the power of images, already still images, but even videos are much more powerful. You need to really know, or you need to tell yourself, no, it is not our chancellor who is speaking, it's just some fake. And if this is really spreading, the confusion about truth or alternative facts, as this unbelievable word has been created, becomes even greater. I think a lot of the right-wing populist movements of our times are based on the algorithms in the internet. For example, the 6 politicians that are most successful on TikTok in Germany are AfD, are the right-wing populist party. I mean, they were very professional in using this. And so my big fear really is that the basis of our democracies will be really bravely demolished if we do not act. And this is where what I said about regulation comes in. I think we need to lead a strong civil society discussion and come to political, also simply forbidding certain things, maybe giving some prints for every video that is artificially shaped or something. So people know, okay, some visible sign. So people know, okay, this has been not original, but has been shaped somehow. That is just one possibility. You could introduce that as a law. And I think we don't lead that discussion yet. And we desperately need to lead that discussion. And my question is, any proposals, any ideas how to deal with this huge problem, with this huge threat?
Mindful of the time, Bishop Heinrich, I think we have time for one or perhaps two responses to that very important question. Would anyone like to
Sure,
initiate a response?
I'll jump in. I talk too much anyway. You know what? There are ways to check those programs to make sure that whether they're AI or not. Just like there are ways to check students' papers to see whether they used AI or not. I know this because I deal with academic integrity at my institution. Those are not perfect, but I think making those be available easily and readily to everybody, and perhaps even requiring that all videos that are posted be checked on those would be a big step forward.
Yes, thanks. That's exactly the right direction.
Any last thoughts? Thank you, everyone, for an engaging conversation then. Thank you, panelists. We're going to change the trajectory of the webinar now and invite attendees to write your questions into the chat function, please. Ask the questions that you're thinking about and hoping to have some conversation about, and we will try and highlight those questions as they come up in the chat. While we're waiting for our first question, perhaps our panelists could offer an opinion, as we've heard a lot about humanity being created in the image of God. For you, panelists, where does being created in the image of God reside? What part of humanity best reflects our being created in God's image? Would anyone like to respond to that?
Well, I tried to mention it a little bit in my talk, but I think it's that creativity aspect, which we can't predict. We can't say how to do it. I don't think we can make even AI be creative. So that's where I would say most of it resides. But there are other aspects that are related to that, like our ability to speak actually helps engage our creativity. Things like that are all kind of unique aspects of being human.
I think it's love. I think it's love. I don't think a robot can love. It can pretend to love, but I don't think a robot can really love. And we talked about how assisting robots in nursing homes can give people the feeling of being loved. But nevertheless, I think that's a unique thing, and it's no coincidence, because if Jesus is really the image of God, like the human being, if that is really true, that what the Bible tells us, then love must be central, because God is love, as John says. So I think love is really decisive.
I think it's just relationality, I would have to say. So I want to draw on the theme of social justice and build on what my two colleagues have just said so well. But relationality around covenant, around connecting with not just each other, but all life is so crucial, and all aspects of our world. And as long as we don't have enough people in staff, in care, to provide the care that we need to provide to others, I'm all for engaging AI to help support that, so long as it doesn't give us an excuse not to keep trying harder.
Thank you all. We had a couple of questions come in. A couple have looked at the impact of AI on Christian religious services. One person asking, is it possible that AI might replace our clergy? Would anyone like to begin to answer that question? Bishop
Okay,
Heinrich.
I got to tell a story. Okay,
okay, Gayle.
So I was teaching a group of Ukrainian priests in Volos in Greece, and about what AI was, and I asked them, what do you want AI to do? And they had AI write a sermon for the Feast of the Transfiguration. They write the sermon, and they all critique the sermon, and they agreed with two things. Number one, that the sermon was not the kind of sermon they would give, because while it was totally accurate, it didn't reflect from the heart. So it didn't say anything from the heart. But the second thing they said was that they still wished all their bishops used AI, because they would get better sermons from AI than they themselves give. Okay, so it's a balance.
I think that's actually exactly the right direction to say AI can help me. I must say I've just tried to generate a sermon. I wanted to know what it generates. It was boring. It was simply boring. I've tried several times and I've stopped. I would have wanted to do it myself anyway, but I wanted advice from AI. So far, it's just a description of my experience. It wasn't good enough to even give me any interesting hint that I wouldn't have known. But if it gets better, I think a great sermon is the best thing. It doesn't matter where it comes from. But I don't want it from a robot. I want it from a real person. We had maybe also a story. We had the German Evangelische Kirchentag, 100,000 people come together every other year. And in 1 year, one of the churches put a blessings robot on their booth, at their booth, and the newspapers wrote about it. And I was the chairman of the council at that time. So when I walked by that booth, they caught me, and they wanted me to go to the blessings robot and be blessed by the robot. I let themselves do it with me. And my experience was the word that the robot spoke, that was actually wonderful. It was a biblical word of blessing. And I heard that from the voice of the robot. So it was not only bad, it was good, like I listened to music. But of course, the robot does not do what a human person does. So let's use it for assistance, but of course not for replacement.
I agree with this. It's because one robot cannot ordain, don't have the grace for the priesthood. So yes, it's not possible.
Thank you all for your responses. I have another question here from an Anglican church participant who suggests, the AI is developing really at such a fast pace, right? Almost at the pace of imagination of the developers, that it's hard to monitor or guard against crises that might be unanticipated by the creators. There are few guardrails in place that creates a potential for danger in at least the near term. How do you respond to that, this moment of technological revolution that humanity finds itself in?
I don't want to talk too much. I would have to say something, but if someone else wants to say something. Well, I think that's a decisive point. Dealing with technologies must always include what we call failure friendliness, which means we must always be aware that these technologies can make mistakes, and we must know how we deal with possible mistakes. So it should be obligatory in a way when technologies are used to include this question in planning the use of these technologies. The problem we face is something that the French sociologist Émile Durkheim has already described in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, looking at the Industrial Revolution. He talked about anomie as a phenomenon. That means technologies are developing so fast that the rules cannot keep up. And they need much longer to get into people's hearts and minds. And I think we are exactly in such a situation of anomie, because these technologies have developed much, much faster even than the Industrial Revolution. And monopolies have been built by some people who were very inventive, great people and great entrepreneurs who control a lot of these data. These are all phenomenons that need to be accompanied politically. That's why we need to make that into a central theme of our democratic discussions. So this anomie can be overcome as quickly as possible, which means we must find the rules and really apply those rules to deal responsibly with these developments.
I'd just like to add a couple of words to that. That was really well put. And you made me think too, Heinrich, of the implications on a political scale and a worldwide scale in terms of the potential for war, the potential for all kinds of mass destruction right now. And we could go on about that, and we should.
I think we have lost Tracy for the moment. We'll wait for her to reconnect.
Yes.
While we're waiting for her to reconnect, if that takes her for a minute, perhaps we could quickly move on to another question, and then we'll come back to Tracy's response when she reconnects. There's a question. From Tracy back?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
Thanks,
This
Tracy.
is rural. I'm in a rural place. So there we go. That's another distributive justice issue, right? So that was just an illustration that I engineered. No. But the whole thing around what's the responsibility of faith communities in the church in terms of what's happening globally with you know, the whittling away of truth, deception. We've been talking, these have been threads that have been throughout our conversation this afternoon, but I think we really need to confront that, and the faith communities have to take a stronger voice on the world stage about what's happening with miscommunication, with lies, with truth telling, and how AI is playing into that.
Can I add something? If I can add some to Tracy, yes, the religion communities can help, because there is an issue how we understand the ethics and how we interpret the ethics. The ethics is it's quite broad. The ethics different, have a different interpretation, Christian, Muslim, and atheists. So the ethics, it's quite broad conversation. How we can help us to find the stability in this new era? According to my opinion, it's to balance and to find, to combine the triangle between the ethics, the human rights, and the law. For example, the European Union have taken regulation the last 5-6 years and adjust the regulation about the AI. And because with this way, with the law, the international law, we can understand and adjust the ethics inside the practice. Because the ethics and the religion, it's how you can adjust these ideas in the practice. So it's very important to define the ethics, but we can define the ethics and interpret them through the human rights and the international law. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to try and get one last question in from our attendees before we conclude the webinar, and that is about AI and the environment. There have been some utopian suggestions that AI will solve all human environmental problems, although we also know that the huge data farms that are required for AI are taking up vast amounts of water and energy. So what is your opinion, panelists? Is AI going to be salvific from an environmental perspective, or something else?
Well, I think you've suggested it already, Peter, in terms of something that's not well understood. I think in terms of AI, in terms of manufacturing equipment for AI use and development, and so on and so forth, and the use of AI, the runnings of AI and data farms and so on and so forth, have an extensive carbon footprint that not many people talk about, because we think of the cloud and other kinds of internet things as being very kind of exactly that, in the cloud, right, without much of a carbon footprint, when in fact there is much to kind of consider there. And at the same time, as we've seen, I think a lot of our conversation has been and we've seen this too with some of the comments towards the end that Tracy was providing about the balance, right, of using of seeing the benefits and the disadvantages, of course, of AI on both sides. So on one side we see a carbon footprint, but on the other end, there is some pretty phenomenal projects that AI has been powering, right, to do things like tracking deforestation in the Amazon, to tracking ice melts and so on and so forth, to help people kind of be more engaged in terms of countering those kinds of activities across the grid, I think. So yeah, there's lots to be done there in terms of using AI, I think, ethically in those kinds of, certainly in the context of environment.
Yeah, this is Gayle. I mean, I agree 100% with what was just said. I mean, there are a couple of other points maybe to think about, and that is that a lot of our even weather forecasting capability is AI based. I mean, you know, a lot of the predictions that are made come from AI, so AI is saving lives by doing that. It's become very, very important in those kinds of technologies. I know that Google is working on trying to decrease the carbon footprint of their AI. I know that a lot of people that work with the more massive supercomputers are also working on approaches to do that. They're using people who are who work on efficient energy to try to do that. Whether they'll be able to do that, I don't know. But certainly people are very aware of that footprint and are trying to do things to reduce it.
Final comment, anyone? Panelists, thank you very much for an engaging conversation today. I'm going to now turn over to Dr. Rosemary Meyer, my co-chair, for concluding remarks.
My name is Dr. Rosemary Meyer, and I represent the Religious Society of Friends in Canada, the Quakers. And I have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of the Faith and Life Sciences Reference Group of the Canadian Council of Churches. Please find in the chat section of the webinar your link to an evaluation of the webinar. Please take a moment to complete this evaluation to provide your feedback about today's event and also to help us plan for future events. This is our first global webinar, and we need your feedback to help us provide the highest possible webinar experience. For those of you interested in supporting and furthering our work at this intersection between Christian faith and science, particularly in the rapidly expanding field of artificial intelligence, we would like to provide you with links to make a financial donation. You may choose to direct your donation in support of the World Council of Churches. You will find the links to the chat section in support of the World Council or the Canadian Council of Churches, and Dr. Peter Nottebohm of the Canadian Council of Churches would like to give a few words to explain this further. Peter?
Thank you so much, Rosemary. You know, it was 80 years ago this past weekend that the Canadian Council of Churches was established, and we're just celebrating that these days and through the end of the year with many different special events. And today's event is definitely qualifies as a special event. I really think these kinds of Canadian and global conversations and dialogue are really essential. Go ahead and click through, Michael. One of the ways that we're trying to reinforce our ability to hold these and to continue this work in a good way is that we launched a fundraising campaign just this past weekend. And we're really raising some money to ensure that our programs are good and strong for the next 3 years, and that we especially reach out to and connect with youth and young adults. And in addition to the global conversation we're having today, also connecting with local worshiping communities in a careful way. One more click through, Michael. And so we launched a campaign to raise 650,000, and we've come some way so far. And I'd really like to invite you to make a contribution to help us move that needle just a little bit further. I dropped into the link, into the chat box, a link to the 80th anniversary campaign and a link to the donate page. And on the donate page, if you click on that one, you can select in the drop-down menu a Faith and Life Sciences option so that the money is given directly to this kind of work. And of course, I see in the chat box the link to the World Council of Churches, another way to demonstrate the value of this work and to help see it continue and flourish. So we're some 73% toward our goal, and we really need your help to help us move that needle further, as I mentioned, to help close the gap. And so I really invite you to make that, make a contribution, whatever you might be comfortable with, by clicking on those links and clicking through to make a contribution. Thank you so much. And back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So panelists, friends, colleagues, fellow attendees, thank you all for attending this webinar today. We're delighted by your interest and trust that today's conversation has stimulated both your thinking and your theological reflections about some of the hopes and challenges of artificial intelligence from the perspective of the Christian faith. Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists for leading us in today's conversation. Professor Trothen, Professor Woloschak, Very Reverend Dr. Gkrekas, Professor Labrecque, and Bishop Dr. Bedford-Strohm. We're deeply thankful to each one of you for today's engaging, enlightening, and challenging conversation. We give you our gratitude. And thank you to the organizing committee for this webinar from both the Canadian Council of Churches, Faith and Life Sciences Reference Group, and also the Faith and Science Working Group of the World Council of Churches. We would especially like to thank Dr. Michael Buttrey for his technical expertise in more than hosting today's webinar. Once again, thank you for your participation. We wish you all a good day, a good evening, and blessings in your life, your work, your ministry. In grace and peace